Shalom, I'm Izzy with Holy Language Institute at holylanguage.com, and I have a bit of a hard question for you. You might not even want to answer it in front of other people, but have you ever read the Bible and felt a little bit bored? I think we all have sometimes. Ideally, that's not the way it is because, the scriptures are new, and through studying God's word, we can come closer to Him and we can relate to Him very personally. And of course, that's a life giving thing, and it exhilarates our hearts to encounter Him and to see Him in His glory and to experience His love and all of this. But then we also have days where we're like, I've heard this stuff before, and it just feels a little bit too familiar, a little bit old. I know I've experienced that. I grew up as a pastor's kid and grandkid, and I grew up hearing a lot of Bible, and I'm so thankful for that. But at the same time, sometimes if you grew up religious, you just kind of take this stuff for granted, and you stop actually thinking about what it means, and it loses its emotional smash. If you've never heard the story of Yeshua, of Jesus, and then you hear that there was a great man, a good man, and he loved you so much that he gave his life sacrificially for you. Like he was actually willing to undergo excruciating torture, just so that you could have a new beginning, and so that you could go free, and so that you could experience forgiveness. Like that could bring you to your knees in tears. Like it could totally change your life. And yet, if you grow up hearing that story, sometimes it doesn't do that in the same way. And I think that's why it's good to hit the reset button and read the scriptures on a regular basis, as if we'd never read them before. Another thing that can be helpful is reading different translations. Sometimes if you only read one translation, it goes into your mind the same way, and you think the same thoughts. But then when you read it in a different translation, things are rephrased, and you're able to look at an old concept through new eyes. That's something that I love doing personally. I love reading different translations, and not just in English, but in Hebrew also. And that's where reading, the original scriptures in Hebrew can be a very meaningful experience also. Looking at the Bible through new eyes by looking at the Bible through the oldest eyes, through the original language. And of course, that's something I'm very, very passionate about as a Hebrew teacher. But you can see how it works both ways. It can work reading the Bible in the original language if you've never done that before. It can also work through just reading different translations. And I'm not going to start talking about all my favorite translations because that would be a big topic, and I am a bit of a nerd when it comes to that. I actually do have like this ongoing series in which I'm reviewing Bibles, specifically Bibles coming from a Jewish or from a Messianic Jewish perspective, at holylanguage.com. But again, that's not the main focus here. What I want to do specifically with you here is I want to look with you at Romans chapter 8, verse 28. A very famous verse that we've heard many times and that I'm sure we've all derived great comfort from and encouraged from. And I want to look at it with you in terms of how it would be phrased in Hebrew. Of course, I would assume that Paul wrote his epistle to the Romans in Greek. Rome, of course, was a Greek and Latin speaking bunch of people. But at the same time, you got to remember that even though Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles, and even though he could speak Greek, and he even had a Greek name Paul, that was only one half of him. His other side, in fact, I would even venture to say his deeper side, was how he grew up. He grew up in Jerusalem, learning at the feet of Rabbi Gamliel, memorizing the Hebrew Bible. He could probably quote the whole thing, word for word, from Genesis to Malachi in Hebrew. He described himself as being a Jew, as being a Hebrew of Hebrews. So he was as Hebrew as they get. And what's interesting is that you can see his Hebrewness coming through even in his Greek letters. You can see some Hebrew wordplay every now and then, some Hebrew word connections. And I want to show you one of those in Romans chapter 8. So we're going to do three things here. We're going to look at Romans chapter 8, verse 28, and how it would be phrased in Hebrew. And we're also going to look at two big theological concepts. We're going to look at the foreknowledge of God and predestination. And I want to show you the Hebrew phrases for these things because I know for me, it helped me to understand these concepts better. In Hebrew, they're significantly simpler, which is nice, not like really big fancy terms. And then they're also more concrete versus, abstract, which is sometimes a little harder for us to wrap our brains around. So let's have a look at that together. And I hope that that these old but wonderful concepts become a little newer and even more wonderful for you. So let me show you something here. We are reading Okay, here is Romans chapter 8 translated into Hebrew. This was done by Franz Delitzsch in the 1800s. He was like a great Christian Hebraist. He loved the Jewish people. He actually translated the New Testament into Hebrew so the Jewish people could read it in their own language and understand the message of it, understand the story of Yeshua for themselves. And indeed, many, many Jewish people have come to see Yeshua for who he is through reading this translation. And I'm doing a series reading through Romans word for word in Hebrew and unpacking it. And we'll just read this verse for now. So this is how, you know what, let's look at it real quick in English first, just so that we're on the same page. Okay, so this is in the New American Standard Version. NAS, King James, they read quite similarly. And we know that God causes all things to work together for good, to those who love God, to those who are called, according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined, to become conformed to the image of his Son. So that's what I want to look at with you. A couple words here. All right, so let's look at how this would be phrased in Hebrew. Vahine, and look, yadanu, so we know, ki, that ohave Elohim. Now this is interesting. In our English it reads, those who love God. But in Hebrew we actually say, God's lovers, his ohavs, those who love him and who are his friends that way. So that's I don't know about you, but for me that gives me a fresh sense of it. And this is the word that God uses in all the way back in the early books of the Bible, in the Torah. He talks about how he shows chesed, he shows his covenant kindness to he says le'ohavai, to my lovers, uleshomrei mitzvotai, and to those who and to the keepers of my commandments. And so that's very powerful. God talks about his lovers all the way back in like Genesis, Exodus, back there. And this is the theme that Paul picks up on. Okay, so we know that for God's lovers, and I don't know about you, but that's incredible. Like definitely God is God, but sometimes I like to think of him in terms of being a God. Of course he's the God, but sometimes when I think of him in terms of being a God, it helps me to understand him a little bit better. Again, it's just getting out of my old, my habituated patterns of thinking. And so just think about that for a second. Like you can actually fall in love with a God. Like you can become the lover of a God. Wow. And of course he is the God. He is God. But just think about that for a second. Like that's the relationship that's available. Like a being who exists in the spiritual dimensions. Like a person who somehow like lives outside of time, but also lives inside of time, and he's real. And you can become his lover. Like that almost sounds like the stuff of Greek mythology. Like that's the stuff the legends are made of. You know what I mean? Except that it's real. Wow. Okay. So God's lovers, hakruim, those who have been called or invited, or the Hebrew word literally means just to cry out. So if you've heard God crying out to you, it's like you've been summoned. You have received an invitation from this God. So those who have been called ba'atzato. So in his eitzah, and this word means like his counsel or his plan or his purpose. So it's like he has this plan. Some of us love planning. Some of us love like thinking strategically and crafting plans. I love plans. So the concept that like God, like he crafted plans like way back before the cosmos, blew into existence, that really thrills my heart. Seriously, all this stuff is like this humongous, like super, super complex plan. Wow. Okay, so hakol, so that's like the all. In other words, everything. Ya'azol. So it helps. And this is a very powerful word for help too. It's not like a weak sauce help. It's like a really powerful word for help. Like if someone like comes through for you, like let's say that your life is in danger, and you're about to be killed, and someone like comes through for you and heroically rescues you, like they're your lifesaver. Like that's the kind of help it's talking about in Hebrew. It's the same word for like a woman being like the helper of her husband. It's like a very powerful word. Okay, so anyway, so like the all will help letov for good lehem to them. So that's how this concept is phrased in Hebrew. Let's just go back and read that a little more smoothly. And look, we know that God's lovers, whom he has cried out to in his plan, the all, will help for good for them. And if you are God's lover, then this is true for you. And this is your experience today, and it will be your experience in the future. Although sometimes it sure doesn't feel like it, and our lives certainly don't look like it. But be assured that that is true. And we know that from the stories of Scripture where great people went through horrible catastrophes and experienced excruciating things. Joseph, David, Job, Moses, Jesus. So if you have gone through situations, or if you're going through situations like that, be encouraged that you're not alone, and that this is still true. All right, now let's look at two more things real quick here. There are these theological concepts: the foreknowledge of God and predestination. And before you say, oh, predestination, that's Calvinism, I'm an Arminian, I believe in free will. Listen. The word predestination is actually in the Bible. Like, it is a biblical word, all right? It does talk about God predestining. So the question is, what does that mean, right? So anyways, I'm not going to tell you what to believe or how to think either. Personally, this is my approach. If I see like two camps and they're both entrenched and they're both dug in and they think they're right, then I always look for the third way. My personal belief is if there are two polarized sides, they're probably both wrong, and they need to get out of the trenches and maybe find the path again. All right. So and that's definitely true, if you ask me, when it comes to the age-old fight between predestination versus free will, Calvinism versus Arminianism. Hebrew thought is very comfortable with this also, by the way, with the approach of both and versus either or. Your ego may not be so comfortable with that, and like Greco-Roman ways of thinking may not take so easily to that, but in the original like Hebrew Jewish thought that the Bible was written in, that goes. That's fine. All right. So anyways, I want to show you the two Hebrew words for foreknowledge and predestination. So it says ki for et asher, those who yida'am, those whom he yadad. This is a beautiful word because it's the word that was used to describe the relationship between Adam and Eve in the garden when they knew each other fully and deeply, and with no inhibitions or reservations, nothing between them. That's the word that's used to describe how God knew you and how God knows you. And it's beautiful that it's not a one-way thing. It's not just that we get to know God a little bit. It's that He knows you this way. And then you get to be drawn into this relationship with Him in which you grow to know Him more closely also, in such a personal fashion. All right. So that's the word that is used to describe God knowing you. It's not like, yeah, I knew about you, kind of, saw you from a distance, maybe, took note of you in his little notebook. No, it's like very personal, right? Intimate. You could even say. Okay, so those whom he knew, mekedem. Now this is a really interesting word, kedem, and I actually want to look at how this word is used in the Hebrew Scriptures with you. Again, remembering that Paul grew up reading the same Bible that Jesus grew up reading, the Hebrew Bible. And so really the Hebrew Bible was the theological word book. It was the dictionary of the Apostle Paul. So, it doesn't hurt to stop and say, okay, even in his Greek letters, what were the Hebrew words that would have summarized these thoughts? What are the words from back from the old scriptures that he would have used to express these thoughts? And that's what we're going to look at here together. All right. So now, kedem is a noun. It comes from the verb kadam. And this is from Harkavy's Dictionary of Biblical Hebrew. I love this dictionary so much because he'll give you the word and then he'll show you all these different ways that it's used throughout Scripture. And you can get this in PDF from the resources page of our website at holylanguage.com, by the way. Okay, so anyways, it means to come before, to go before, or to precede. That's the big idea. And then there are some other ways that it's used, as you can see here. And then from this verb we get kedem, which has the sense of noun. It can also be used as an adverb, as you can see. So it means in front of or before. And it's also the Hebrew word for the east, The east is like the Kedem. Because, yeah, well, anyways, we're not going to delve into that, some geographical stuff there. But it really is quite fascinating. And this is even a word that's used to describe God. It's not just a word for, like, the direction of the east on the compass. For instance, God is referred to as the Elohe Kedem. He's the God of Kedem. Like, he's the God who was before everything else. He's the God who is eternal, who is everlasting. And it's interesting because it even has the sense of the Eastern God, the Middle Eastern God. Maybe if we're out in the West, that can actually be meaningful to us. Here's another example: the ancient mountains. That's also the word for ancient, right? So you can see that's a big word. But the big idea behind this big word is that it just means like previously or before. All right. So now, with that in mind, let's go back to, where are we? Okay, here we are. Let's go back to this Hebrew text of Romans chapter 8. And let's look at what foreknowledge means in Hebrew. So, Yida'am, he knew them, Mekedem, from before. That's basically what it means. And I know that's really similar to our English word foreknowledge, right? But just think about that for a second. Think about that for a second, because like this is like a theme that great stories are told from. Like this is a theme that comes up in like movies that really grab you. This concept that like suddenly you realize you knew this person from before, or they knew you from before, and this is true for you and God. God says, "I knew you. I knew you from before." Wow. Actually, I'll tell you a little story about that. So I grew up in the city of Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, and we had some neighbor kids across the street, the Tors. And, they were about our age, and they would come over and play, and we had a great time together. And then the Tors moved away to Eastern Canada, and they were gone. Like 2 decades elapsed at least. This one day, some friends called us up and said, "Hey, we have some new friends that we made. They're visiting from Eastern Canada." We were like, "Oh, let's go over and visit." So we went over and visited. We were all sitting around chatting. The girl, Priscilla, well, she was like, a lady. But anyway, she mentioned that she actually lived in Saskatoon a long time ago for a couple of years when she was a kid. We're like, "Oh, really? Where did you live?" And she was like, she couldn't remember. She was so young, she couldn't even remember. And somehow we got this weird feeling. And we started asking some questions about what her neighborhood looked like. And there was this sudden moment where we realized this woman sitting in front of us, Priscilla, was the kid that we played with, like when we were kids. And like we were, like my whole family was sitting there, and all of a sudden, like it was just this electrifying moment. And we all stopped and we stared. And then we all went like flying out of our seats, and we like flew across the room, and we all like hugged her, and we were like laughing and crying, and it was incredible. There's this thing about when you knew someone from before that has deep emotional resonance. Here's another example: the story of Joseph. Joseph's brothers thought he was dead. They were scared their families were going to die of starvation. They're going down to Egypt, risking their lives to get some food. They end up in front of this Egyptian guy who was the second in command. Probably freaked out, especially because he gets all mean on them, and ends up throwing them in prison, letting them go. They go back, and then they have to come back and deal with him again. And then there's this sudden moment where they realize that they actually knew this guy from before. This was actually their brother from a long time ago. And it's the same thing. It's a very emotionally charged moment. And that's the sense in Hebrew of the foreknowledge of God. God says, "I knew you from before. I recognize you." And who knows? Maybe there's even this moment where you realize that you knew him from before also, and that you recognize him. All right. So that's the foreknowledge of God. Let's just talk for a second now about predestination. I know that's a big word, right? And you know what? Honestly, I don't even like that word because it has so much religious baggage, and like people fight over these words, and I hate fighting. I do. It's kind of weird because I train at an MMA gym like several times a week, and physically, like I love fighting. Like I've never been in an actual like street fight or a brawl. I'd rather run away because I'm like a very gentle soul. But I do love training, and I do love like grappling and striking. It's a lot of fun. But when it comes to people like actually getting ugly and fighting over like theology and stuff, like that really, really, really turns me off. And so, this whole concept of predestination, maybe you've experienced this, maybe it just turns you off. But listen, this is a word that's in the scriptures, and it's a beautiful concept that describes your relationship with God and our relationship with this being whose lovers we're becoming. So let's look at this word together also. Okay, so firstly we learned that the foreknowledge of God, it means you were Yadad from before. He knew you from before. So it says Otam, them, Gam, also Ya'ad. Okay, and that's the word we're gonna look at. He Ya'aded them, and then it's repeated again. Those who Ya'ad, whom he Ya'aded Mekedem. All right, now this is interesting. Firstly, he knew you from before. The second word here is this word. He Ya'aded you from before. What does this word mean? Let's look at it together, and you'll get a better sense of predestination in Hebrew. All right, so back here. Here is our word, Ya'ad. The Hebrew verb Ya'ad means to appoint. And actually, this is the verb behind the Hebrew word Moed. The plural is Moedim. Maybe you're familiar with that word. God's Moedim are his appointed times. In Leviticus 23, it says, these are the feasts of the Lord. Well, those are his Moedim, his appointed times. And this is the verb behind that, to appoint. So in Hebrew, if you want to say that God predestined, you say that he appointed from before. And man, you might even want to pause this and just look at the full meaning of this word to appoint, because it's loaded. It's going to give you such a better sense of the feasts of the Lord and what they're all about and the spirit of the law behind them. But for now, it's enough for you to know that it means appointed, fixed, can have the sense of gathering, coming together, gathering together on the basis of an appointment. You have an appointment in space-time, so you all meet at the same time. It means that. All right. Now, what does that tell us about what Paul taught about our relationship with God? He says, God didn't just know you from before, he appointed you from before, so that you would bump into each other at a specific point in space-time. He set an appointment, like a date, a rendezvous point. Maybe you didn't even know about it. Like before you were born, you probably didn't. When you were a teeny tiny baby, you probably didn't. But there began to be this emerging awareness in your mind that there is a God out there, that there's somebody out there, and that he knew you from before, and you're coming to know him, and you're coming to fall in love with him. You're coming to fall in love with a God. Wow. Anyways, that's what I wanted to share with you. I could talk on and on about this, because it really captivates my heart. And hopefully this has been a little hopefully this has helped you to wake up in a deeper way. Hopefully it's helped you to see some cliched terms, some old words through new eyes. Hopefully it's helped you to maybe feel something in response to this stuff that you haven't felt in a long time. I really hope it has. This is what I do. I teach Hebrew. I use Hebrew as a way to help people to grow in their relationship with God, understand the scriptures better in that original Hebrew Jewish context, and most importantly, come closer to the Messiah and fall more deeply in love with him. I would love to have you join us. Our website's holylanguage.com. We have several courses and ongoing series. We have a community of people studying together from all around the world with a simple focus on just coming closer to Yeshua and understanding him better in that original Hebrew Jewish context of the Bible. Right? Come see us at holylanguage.com. And in the meantime, I hope that this has been meaningful to you. Just to know that God knew you from before, and he appointed you from before. And all the stuff that's happening in your life, if you are truly his lover, and if you are falling in love with him, then it's all for the best.